And they turn.
No, that's the same.
Also,
I was trying to find Mars.
oh my goodness.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Tiggs, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here on Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are delighted to have you all here, both in person and virtually, as we celebrate the launch of 2 new books set in a collaborative world that you'll be hearing a little bit more about. This is also our final in-store event of the year, and I can't think of a better way to go out. So we have a fantastic brain trust on the chairs just to my left that you'll be hearing from over the course of the evening. So given that this is our climactic event for the year, it is up to them to make it the best event we have hosted in this series. Now, I don't think that'll be much of an issue because we are launching 2 books this evening, both from Stranger Fiction. And there's a fascinating concept behind this that'll be explained to you in just a moment. The books we are launching are Shared World by Jonathan Ball, GMB Chomichuk, James Gillespie, and Chadwick Ginther. And we are also launching Chadwick's standalone book set in the same universe, Khyber. Now, this will be a collaborative book launch, so there'll be a chance for you all to participate as well as you watching online. So we'll get to that as opportunities present itself. And the only thing I will point out is that at the close of the evening, we'll ask you all to remain in your seats for one moment while we escort these gentlemen to a table beside our cash desk to sign books for you. While you are waiting for that, you'll notice that there is this beautiful display of prints at this table over there. Now, those prints are yours simply by virtue of you being physically here with us tonight. So please do avail yourself of a print, and if you'd like it signed, you can also bring one of those over to the signing table at the close of the event as well. I'll have more thrilling and adrenaline-packed notes on signing procedure for you at the close of the event, but for now, we'll get on to the people you're here to hear from. So, Jonathan Ball, sitting at the far chair, is the author of The Lightning of Possible Storms and Clockfire, among many other books, and the winner of multiple Manitoba Book Awards. Beside him is James Gillespie, an award-winning graphic designer and art director for Canada's History Society, coordinating the publications Canada's History and Kayak, Canada's History magazine for kids. I'll let you know about this gentleman sitting beside Gregory in just a moment because he'll be up to read. But GMB Chomichuk is an award-winning writer and illustrator whose work has appeared in comics, graphic novels, books, role-playing games, film, television, and theater. And he is the author of the Automatic Age series. Now, finally, our featured reader for this evening is, of course, Chadwick Ginther, the author of the Thunder Road trilogy, and most recently, When the Sky Comes Looking for You, stories or short trips down the Thunder Road, a collection of short stories set in the same universe. He's also the author of Graveyard Mind, the winner of an Aurora Award, and multiple Manitoba Book Awards. I always forget how difficult it is to say Aurora Award. And he is, of course, the author of Khyber, which is one of the books we are here to celebrate. So please join me in giving a very raucous welcome to Chadwick.
Thanks, John. I really appreciate the intro as always. And I got to tell you, this is like a lifetime coming. For those of you who knew me growing up, I got a book with a map, and that is the #1 author dream fulfilled. I think I'm just going to get right into it here. This is a world shared by rakes, reavers, sorcerers, and slayers, undead kings and undying things. It is a place made real through its stories. In a time before time, a great civilization stood unchallenged, unassailable, but nothing remains untouchable forever. The power humanity once wielded to make themselves as unto gods was grasped and scrabbled over until it was lost and slipped into legend and stories. That lost cradle of humanity became the Once Lands. Or so the tales go, but who is telling them and why? Kingdoms rose and fell, the dead walked, and monsters crawled out of fell pits that opened in the collapse. Human monsters, not to be outdone, commanded cities and armies, each seeking to carve their bloody names into legend. From the rime-crusted coasts of Elpura to the blazing deserts of Gara, adventurers dared primordial ruins, forgotten forests, and cursed catacombs for power, for vengeance, or for thrills, earning their living or their death with wit and steel. The lights have gone out. Ancient powers linger and clutch at the hearts of heroes. Through whispering tomes and cursed gems, dreams and prophecies, they make promises to the unwary and feed the hunger of fell desire. Even heroes must be wary that quest and company do not serve alien interests in a wax face. Perhaps a new torchbearer may relight the flames of mystery and magic, wonder and drive back these shadow emperors to the dark places between worlds. Welcome to Shared World. So that's a little intro that Jonathan made us write, which I think is a fantastic idea. We all collaborated on that. But I'm going to go into the city of Khyber. And this is a story that is original to this collection. I'm going to read a little bit from Cold Cuts in Cannibal Quarter. Red had no bloody idea where she'd been taken. Cannibal Quarter and the culinary guild who ran it were dirty, if open secrets in Khyber. But the quarter wasn't a physical part of the city. The guild's members could come from any part of Khyber. The watch turned their backs to the guild as long as they were careful who they harvested and who they fed them to. Red had let herself be taken, her adopted brother Needle's harebrained scheme. She blinked away her drowsiness. The cold helped. She'd never known such cold. Khyber never got so cold. A thick spear of light stabbed through a small square window in a door. The window didn't offer enough light to fully take in her surroundings, and yet, at the same time, made her predicament all too clear. Her head pounded. She wanted to sick up. She'd been warned to expect that, and to expect what she saw next. Bodies hung still from hooks and chains suspended from the ceiling, dead eyes pleading like cattle sensing the slaughter. The fresh meat. Among them, she recognized men and women from their sponsor's dinner party. Needle hadn't warned them they were about to become dinner. Couldn't trust they wouldn't flap their gums. Stripped, bodies shaved, heads, eyebrows, armpits, chests, heads, sexes, all laid bare. Needle dangled from a hook beside Red. She swiveled around, wincing. The others were too far dead to help or be helped. Further back in the ice house, past gutted and butchered bodies, were racks of salt and earthenware jars, the contents of which were a mystery Red didn't want answered. Needle, wake up! No response. Her brother's eyes were half open, docile from cold and drugs. She kicked at him, but he didn't flinch. You're not dead, I'll kill you. Bloody hells, this job was a lot of trouble to rescue one person. Haley Marisander, a dwarf girl she'd heard, their sponsor's daughter. Someone who was owed a favor by someone Needle and Red owed a favor. Someone's child. So was every other person on a hook. Daughters, sons, fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters. They were all people. Maybe some of them deserved to die, but the thought of any of them in a cookpot made Red sick. It was hard to think. The last of the antidote to the guild's heart-stopping cocktail still clouded her mind. There's no one poison they used. She'd been told the cannibals used combinations of chemicals that were, on their own, innocuous. Together, they could stop a heart or shudder a mind, all without tainting the meat. A club or stiletto would have been simpler, but the culinary guild viewed themselves as civilized and wanted not a drop of blood or gobbet of meat to go wasted. Her ankles and wrists were manacled and joined by chains. Without her brother conscious to pick her locks, she'd have to wait quickly. Her wrists burned where the manacles had cut into her flesh, and her shoulders ached from suspending her weight for Faya only knew how long. She knew the goddess wouldn't answer her question. Faya's answers all came with a sword in hand. Red's wrist chains were looped around a hook drilled into a thick wood beam. She sniffed. Their captors were lazy. They wanted their meat easy to hang, easy to release. She could get out of this. Red was tall, but her toes didn't touch the floor. She couldn't push herself up to make the chain slack and slide it off the hook. She wrapped her legs around the nearest body that wasn't her brother and shimmied upwards, locking her ankles under its armpits. From there, it wasn't too far to climb to reach the beam. Ice and frost fell from the ceiling as she dragged herself hand over hand up the chain. She lifted her own chain free and dropped to the floor, cold stones slapping her numb feet. She was still manacled, but her feet were on the ground. A start. Red would feel better when she had her sword in her hand, assuming the Marisander family's contact had done as promised. Promises were valuable as piss in Khyber. Once she picked the locks, her manacles would serve as a makeshift flail until she had her blade. Alden Marisander had told them where to find their stash. She'd have her sword soon enough. She didn't trust him, but she trusted he knew better than to cross her. Needle and Red belonged to no crew, and each was notorious in the quarters of Khyber they claimed as their own. Marisander's fear had been obvious when they'd been sent to help him. He'd come through. Two voices grew closer, their words indistinct. Years as a thief had given Red a fine ear for approaching footsteps, and whoever was outside the door made no attempt to hide themselves. Keys jangled as the lock turned. Red hid behind a well-hung dead man, hoping the icehouse's deeper shadows would obscure her feet and keeping only a sliver of bare space to spy on the door. Her head throbbed. She readied for a fight. Thank you. Everything else was explosive, so.
Dun, dun, dun. Come on in. And for those of you who are just arriving, we're going to avert our eyes so you don't feel singled out as I point to you and find a seat there. Yeah, perfect. There's plenty. We did it. Dear listeners, thank you so much for coming. You got to listen to one of the best of us. Chadwick is the first to graduate from the shared world into his own volume. And I think the important distinction here is that as you'll see the mischievous smile on Jonathan's face, this is because Jonathan and I were supposed to have our acts together with our own complete collections already, but only Chadwick made the deadline. So he is the star of the day, which really does speak to his ability to roll his sleeves and really get his hands bloody when ready. So the first question may be, why would you all come to support us? The second one would be, how do you make up a story? Some people find that to be a challenge. And I wanted to show you that there's absolutely nothing special about any of us. It's really easy. And with your help, with my help and your help, we are going to put these three gentlemen on the spot. How does that sound? Right? Clap your hands if you would like to see them suffer. Since theoretically, these are horror stories, right? It's a blend of genre. Sword and sorcery contains many elements, but the easiest way to talk about them and see them is to play with them yourself. So if you will take a look at the homework sheet I handed out earlier, if you turn to the side that says shared world, you will notice that it will contain everything you need to write a story if you only know the basic constituent parts of a story. Now, my fellow studio mates have heard me go on and on about this, but for those of you who are new, stories are very simple. They are someone, somewhere, wants something, and then a complication ensues. So on your sheet, you will notice that you can very easily create a someone. Then you can pick a place, and the only person that has to know anything about that place is us, because we made them up. And so if we don't know, you won't be able to tell if we're lying about them, which is also a great part. And then a thing that they want is also on the sheet. So someone somewhere wants something. And then if you turn the sheet over, this is why stories work. A complication ensues. Every story you've ever heard has the same basic features. Someone somewhere wants something and a complication ensues. So let's see if there are any brave people in the audience who would like to put our authors through the paces. So if you take a look where it says, for example, it might say a deadly warlock with unusual courage. I need somebody to make that combination themselves and raise their hand to suggest it. And I'm going to throw it. Okay, perfect. Yes. What do you got?
A daring vagabond with weird powers.
Okay, hold that thought. A daring vagabond with weird powers. I'm going to reiterate the voices from the crowd for the online audience.
So,
Where should they be from?
The shared world, of course.
Well, yes, there's a map for them. Pick a name.
Khyber.
Khyber. Okay, so we have a character in Khyber, a deadly vagabond from Khyber. And what is it they're after? Yes. Yeah, I saw that hand. I saw that interest. You.
The objects?
Yeah,
Or the answer?
yeah.
Is it a vagabond? Vagabond, very vagabond with what?
Weird power.
Weird powers. If only we had a
Lantern.
theremin.
They want the lantern.
So a daring vagabond with weird powers in Khyber is seeking a lantern. All right, so first of all, scene one. Tell us, who is this character and what did they want? Tell us about it.
Daring vagabond. Okay. This is someone who, Khyber has many quarters. And amongst the city, you basically have to bribe or use graft to get from quarter to quarter, either coin or favors. Otherwise, you're kind of stuck where you grew up. And so I feel like this vagabond moves between the quarters.
Using the lantern, ooh, nice, or needs the lantern to move
They
between.
need the lantern because also underneath Khyber is the Undercity. Khyber is at the crux of 3 continents and has always been an important trade center. And so like places like Rome or Istanbul in our world, it has been built up and destroyed over years and years and years. And so old parts of the city are still accessible underground. And that's how thieves and ne'er-do-wells move around the city.
Beautiful, see how you did
Let
it?
me throw
What is the,
something in.
yes, I was gonna ask you,
One of the
Don't worry.
things with the shared world is this idea that, it's called the shared world because we've kind of co-created a world that we're sharing. So we're setting, different stories in the world, the 2 books, they're not like one isn't sequenced after the other. And they have a bunch of these independent stories in them, but at the same time, they're all set in the same world. Khyber features my story, even though, I didn't invent Khyber, etc. Anyway, what I really like about our whole shared world concept is being able to pull things from different stories. One of the things that's in James and Gregory's story is that it's not in Khyber, but in a different area. There's kind of this, subterranean place where the torches won't stay lit. And so what if there's in Khyber, deep enough in the Undercity, some area where torches won't stay lit? That's why you need the lantern. Combining those elements. That's what I like so much with the shared world idea is, I don't have to have all these great ideas. I can just steal them. And those combinations, I think, are what I really like about the project as a whole.
wait, we'll talk about the project in a second. You hold that thought.
Yeah,
You hold that
that's
thought.
my contribution.
What is a weird power, James?
His ability to pass through walls.
So a vagabond that can pass through walls is seeking a lantern that will stay lit in the
And pass through
Undercity.
walls with it.
Right, oh, a special lantern. Okay, now,
Not only can he pass through walls, he can pass other objects through walls.
beautiful. Now, somebody raised their hand. If you turn your sheet over, you will find a series of calamities waiting to happen. Someone somewhere wants something and a complication ensues. You can go ahead and either select one of those characters that is present and tell us which one you choose by simply raising your hand, and then these gentlemen will be forced to figure it out live before this unforgiving audience. Or you can just pick one of those random sound effects and watch as their imaginations unfurl. simply raise your hand. We can either volunteer or voluntarily. Oh, I like this guy's moxie. Okay, so our vagabond, you don't get to see, I'm gonna describe it for you, right? Our vagabond comes face to face as he's phasing through a wall with a huge mutinous creature wearing the skulls of his enemies on his chest, his long multi-jointed fingers, his slathering jaws. What is gonna happen next? Who should we pick on? Who should we? Jonathan? Pick on Jonathan, I'm
What's
told.
happening next? Does he have the lantern yet? Does he trying to get?
No, he's trying to get the lantern.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the immediate thing I would try to do in that situation is try to phase through the creature and see if it works.
Good question. Raise your hand if you think that should work. No, raise your hand. By show of hands only. Raise your hand if you think Jonathan's idea is bad. That will not work. Raise your hand. It will not work. Your idea has been vetoed by the collective.
See, because just to phase through a wall takes so much effort. So he can't, it's not easy for him.
Right.
You know, as someone who has read way too many X-Men comics, I think he should try to pull the monster's hand into the wall and leave it stuck there so that he can get around it.
All in favor of that working? Okay.
That's good.
So our vagabond with weird powers in search of a mysterious lamp that will stay lit in the under realm of Khyber, face to face with a mutant, seizes its hand and without the power or strength to themselves phase away, has just enough strength to push its flesh into the stone. See how easy this is?
And then interrogate the creature for information.
Now, the next question is about the creature. All right. Now let's remember that stories are not just about the heroes, but about all the characters within them. So turn back around and you will now tell me about that creature. You first thought they were just a monster. They're people too, right? Someone is going to tell me the constituent parts of that mutated person met in the underground. I see a hand, but we've heard from you. Is there there's a shy person willing to share. Pick for me some details about this creature.
It's a ghost hunter hunting a ghost looking for a lantern.
It's a ghost hunter that is faced off against your vagabond, and the ghost itself is looking for a lantern. Oh, I like this. I like this. This presupposes that in the underground are specters that constantly wander looking for the lantern. And perhaps that's a threat here as well. Oh, that's good. Okay, I like it, I like it. Now, what does this specter, what does this thing want?
This thing wants to kill the ghost. This thing wants to kill the ghost that's killed one of its family members.
It's motivated. Now, my question is, of course, to Chadwick, because he's the one that always has his characters have many duplicitous qualities. So Chadwick, is this vagabond responsible for the death of the person the ghost laments?
I feel like since it's a short story.
It's a very short story, so it has to be. So now you efficiency. So here's the best part about this. You've learned an important skill in writing stories is that you don't add more details than are necessary. You draw upon the details that are present. So yes, he did do it. So somebody tell me the noise the ghost makes. That's on your complication cell. Tell me the noise the ghost makes. You can raise your hand or you can just shout it out. Oh, there's somebody who wants to. You've been voluntold.
You, Antonio.
Tell us the noise the ghost makes as this spectral apparition comes looming. Is that about approximated? All right, for
Sounds a little like the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
A little bit. Okay, so just for those of you playing the home game and those of you here, the story so far is this: a vagabond who has come creeping into the underground beneath the city of Khyber, who has the strange power to pass through walls, has done so to seek a lantern that will allow him to traverse the underground realm with light. But before he can get too far. A strange mutant, a mutant that in fact hunts the ghosts that live beneath Khyber, has attacked him, mistaking him for a ghost as he passes through a wall. A common mistake in this day and age. And with quick thinking, that vagabond seizes the creature's hand and phases it into the wall. Now exhausted, their unusual powers no longer available for a short time. When the apparition the mutant was hunting in the first place arrives just then to say, "Ah!" What should happen next? So here's where we're going to decide how much the character should suffer. If you think the character should suffer a lot, please raise your hand. If you think they've earned a small respite, please raise your hand. Whoa. What is the advantage they have here? Our hero. The crowd says this should not be the end of our hero. They should have some advantage here. What should it be, James? It's up to you. We're all looking at you. Everyone's staring at him intently right now, so the pressure builds. This is collaborative writing. Answer us now.
Well, the advantage is that he's trapped the monster. He's done his part, so he can move freely around the room.
So it's those of you who voted for suffering, it's the mutant that suffers now and suffers horribly as the apparition begins to rend its very flesh, allowing our somewhat dubious vagabond to slip away, seeking the lantern. What should be the next complication before they can find this lantern? Yes.
The mutant sends the animated skeletons of his enemies from his chest after the vagabond.
I hope you are a dungeon master. He is. Because perfect answer. Perfect answer. So for those of you playing the home game, our mutant ghost hunter, who is now faced to the wall, of course, has a collection of reliquaries around its neck, and these skulls now light up almost like lanterns themselves to float and come seeking our vagabond. That's you. You're in charge. What are they going to do? Tell us what they're going to do, and the audience will tell us if it works.
I think they're going to try and tie him to the physical plane, kind of like the chains around Jacob Marley.
Oh, like loop around him. Oh, that's good. Do we think that should work? That the skulls themselves should coalesce around our vagabond, negating his powers for the rest of our story? Raise your hand if you think that's a good idea. Well, that's pretty strong. Raise your hand if no, he deserves better. He deserves better. A few of you know. Trapped. Now, when it comes to horrible suffering, there are none better than Jonathan Paul to suggest details. All right? What horrible suffering beyond a limitation of the powers do these skulls cause?
I feel like you need to add a clock of some sort. So
Said the author of
maybe
Clock
there's
Fire.
yeah, there's some sort of way in which now he has a limited amount of time before these things consume him. Saying they're eating away at him.
They're eating
They're
him.
getting tighter, eating. He's only got a certain amount of movement.
They're
etc.
regaining their life as they eat him.
Yeah, so he's got, he knows he'll have X amount of time, but no longer to find this lantern and burn them off of him with his power or whatnot.
Oh, that's good. Oh, that's good. Okay, we're going to accept that. All right, so our vagabond staggering away into the dark in search of the lantern, being bitten a mouth at a time by these strange skeletal heads, encumbering him in their spectral fashion. He moves away from the call of the spirit. Do you want to make the noise, or shall I? I can. Oh, thank you. That's so nice of you. It recedes into the distance, but lo, another sound he hears. Someone should check that page and find a sound. Slap, 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 like the sound of flesh upon flesh. Now let's keep it PG, people. James, the least PG of us all, is going to tell us what is that noise in the dark. Slap, slap, slap.
It's the feet of another wandering creature.
What creature is it? Only the audience can tell us. Only the audience can tell us. I can see you. You want to pick. I can see it. Right there, yeah. Which creature is it?
It's the weight of the skeleton back.
She's gonna have a lantern.
A bear, yeah, because we're running out of time. They better put the lantern in her hand. There, a strange spectral light begins to fill the corridor. And the slap, slap, slap of bare feet as a great barbarian queen, a huge golden axe in her hand, strides forward, the protector of the land. She wears a huge skull of a demon. And she looks at the vagabond and says, trip, trip, like the first line of a strange poem, perhaps a riddle, if there are any good poets or riddlers out there. Trip, 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 she says. What does the vagabond do?
I think he opens a vein.
Oh, that's so good. That's such a Chadwick answer too. That's so good. Now, our vagabond has prepared for this. He draws a slender knife from within his cloak and drawing a small, sharp X on the back of his palm to fulfill the riddle of blood. Drip, 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 so careful to only let 3 drops fall before wrapping the hand in the cloak. And then the barbarian queen takes a knee and hands the lantern to him, where he can now go on with his adventure in your own imaginations. Thank you so much for your participation. Good job, you guys. So it's often a question of how do you make up a story as a group? Well, now you know, right? You just accept the parts that everyone goes, oh, as good, and the parts where people go, as bad. And I could not have a better group of gents to have that kind of collaboration with. We know when our gasps align, we know we'll keep it, and when our kind of sad disdain shows on our faces, we just move on. Right, so I'm going to ask each of you, I asked these gentlemen to prepare a short reading of somebody else's work. So I asked them to take a couple of sentences from the book that they didn't write, and then we'll attribute them to the author and make that author answer some questions about it. How's that sound? We have some nods. Oh, he's really into that. Yeah, okay, good. James, you're going to go first. A brief reading, if you will. Oh, look how prepared. Now that's an art director's preparation. You see that color-coded, perfectly aligned? Look at my preparation.
All right. My selection is Chadwick's, and it's from When the Gods Send You Rats.
I almost read that story too.
And I'm a particular fan of how he describes characters and brings stuff to life. So I've chosen a section right here, and it's, I'll just read it out to you now. He returned with a stout stick that had the look of an axe handle. He leaned upon it as if it were a cane. Stoppered gourds strung together with hempen rope rattled against each other. A rat skull, almost as large as a cat's, hung from a beaded chain around his neck. Several holes had been drilled in it. He raised it to his lips like it was a conch from the sea and blew a shrill note. A rat in a cage stood up on its hind legs at the sound, as if it were a soldier giving a salute.
How do you do it, Chadwick? That's the real question. We won't have to give context unless you want to about the piece, but what I want to ask is, all your stories have a certain cadence, right? Is that something that comes naturally, or is that something that you have to craft? Is it through editing, taking out words, putting in words? What's the secret? We all want to get better at writing.
I'm a very loose drafter, so I tend to try to get the words down, discover what the story is, and then go back in and hone it to find the cadence. I feel like it comes out of just my process of, I don't know how many drafts when the God Send You Rats went through, but the story I'm submitting tomorrow, if all goes according to plan, is on its 20th pass through. And that's not like 20 complete rewrites. That's 20 times through a full manuscript of, you know, marking it up, tightening it, expanding it.
Do you tend to take out more than you put in?
Absolutely.
Yeah. That, keep it PG, listen, there's always someone in the crowd.
No, just, you know, using a story that nobody can read yet. The first full draft of it, that all the story was there, it was 8,500 words. The word count limit for the anthology is 5,500 words, so I had to lose 3,000.
Whoa.
And I, you know,
That freaks me out.
I shouldn't call it a machine because now there's AI and it's, you know, it's not a machine. It's just a list of words that I overuse. And I just go through it meticulously. And I find that in skipping around the story randomly and not reading it sequentially, sentences and paragraphs will jump out at me of, I don't need this. I said this over here. And that's how I do cuts. Or
You don't read it sequentially when you do it?
I do, but when I'm just trying to cut words, I will jump around non-sequentially. I also will go, okay, I have to lose 3,000 words. The story is 30 pages. That means this many words per page have to go.
Ruthless, bloody and ruthless. Okay, my reading is also ruthless, and it's by Jonathan Ball. I'll also mention that I asked the gentleman to prepare these readings without letting anyone know what they'd be reading from, so that they wouldn't know, they wouldn't be able to think too much about it. Now, Jonathan really writes really pleasant, friendly passages, as you will soon see. He pushed his face forwards into hers, and the tentacles stretched into her open mouth. Without thinking, she bit down, severed them. In an instant, the pain in her wrist went away as her head exploded with horror. The sorcerer chittered and pulled away, hands rushing to his face to soothe the injured tentacles, while their ichor burned holes in her cheeks and cracked her tongue. How dare you?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know what's interesting about that? I'm a very structuralist writer and thinker. So I knew that the sort of basic premise of the stories that I'm writing, they're all kind of like individual stories, but they feature the same character and they sort of line up in like her quest, although there are kind of standalone stories on a certain level. So and basically is this, you know, cannibal huntress who is she's like separate herself from her people because she's trying to pursue this dark, you know, evil god. It's sleeping and she wants to wake it up. Why? You know, well, there's a couple levels to that, but I knew at some point what I needed her to do. In the first story that Gregor read from, she's sort of hunting this, you know, it's almost like a Stephen King setup, like the man in black fled across the desert. The gunslinger.
If you're gonna steal from
so
the
it's like she's like pursuing this, you know, guy, and when she finally gets to him, they have this altercation. I knew that she needed to ingest some of his blood, but it had to be blood from like a portion of his body.
So these are on your plot notes. You're just
exploded.
looking down.
Yeah.
Oh yes. At this point, ingest blood.
Yeah. Well, I wanted her to have a hallucination, and I was like, I'm kind of working backwards. Like, she needs to have a vision. Okay. How is she going to get that vision? Well, she'll have a hallucination. Well, why would she have a hallucination? Well, she's going to ingest something that'll give her a hallucination. And well, what else is happening in the story? Well, she's pursuing this guy. They'll have an altercation. There'll have to be a fight. At some point in the fight, she'll have to ingest some part of his body or his blood. And then I ended up kind of working it backwards to, he's got this hood that is kind of shading his face. When he lifts it up, he's got tentacles instead of eyes. And then they get into it. So it surprises her. It gives him a reason why she's taken aback, and he can get close to her. And then their heads are together. And then, of course, what are you going to do? His head's right there. She's going to have to bite. But then, you know, that has the adverse effect of, you know, and then, so one of the things that kind of happens, I like to chain everything together in that kind of consequential way. But for me, it's all about kind of figuring out, okay, here are the like structure of how I want the story to go. What's the most interesting way to get to that point? Like I could always have to just pick up a drug and ingest it. That's so bland and boring to me, like, because that's what you would think that would happen.
Right.
And once she decides to do it, now you're expecting her to do it. Like I want it to happen unexpectedly, you know? So I'm just kind of trying to figure out like,
So
the permutation that makes most sense.
Just to sum up, he's gonna have a vision. The best way to have a vision is to eat part of someone's face. But I don't want it to just be any part of their face. We've seen that so many times. Why don't
No,
we have
that's literally what I'm thinking though.
let's have their eyes be tentacles. We haven't seen that before. And then we can eat
Tentacles are kind
tentacles.
of in the realm of things we've seen with Lovecraftian creatures.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's close enough that it's not totally unfamiliar, but it's not expected in this moment.
Right.
So there's like enough grounding that you kind of get it. Like it kind of makes sense to you. Like, oh, of course she bites the tentacles. That'll give her a vision. Like there's a level of like, it's just familiar enough from the tropes that it kind of makes sense, but it also isn't expected.
This is
I don't
why it's
explain
called
it
Laureate
well.
Hill.
That's right. Yeah, this is,
Yeah.
just in case you haven't seen it, his business card says Jonathan Ball, Poet Laureate of Hell. Do you have a rating that you would like to share? with
Yeah,
us?
actually, I picked two different ones. I'll do the one from yours and James's story. Sorry, I gotta get the robots. So this is from Kashufa. So what I like about this, by the way, is you mention in it the Yellow King, at Carcosa. So that's like a line in the passage. So before I just read this section, I just want to know, like, one of the things that I think is really interesting about this project and why, like, I kind of came to the project late, but what attracted me to it is there was this great moment in literary history where the pulp writers like Lovecraft and Howard and so on, you know, Chambers and all these, you know, writers, they were writing and they were kind of friends or confidants, you know,
Pen pals in many
pals
cases.
in many cases. And what they would do is they would actually include elements from each other's stories. Like Carcosa features in Robert E. Howard's story or Dagon, I know, features in Robert E. Howard's story at one point. I know Lovecraft, I think, mentions Carcosa at one point. I can't remember off the top of my head. But there's like a lot of that overlap where they like name drop each other or quote for each other or do these deep little things. That's kind of gone. Like literary industry has become so corporatized and everything has to be like a unique, distinct IP that doesn't cross over with another one unless it's sanctioned by Disney in such and such a way. You know, like it's gotten to that point, I feel, on a certain level, and you kind of, there's good things about it in some ways. Like these things can have a reach that they never could have in Lovecraft's day. Even the Lovecraftian expansion is only possible in some ways because of this corporatization. But on a certain level, you miss that magic and that kind of community aspect.
What you're saying is sharing is punk rock.
Yeah, the share, well, on a certain level, like I kind of come from the DIY punk rock aesthetic on a certain level.
The only one of us to be featured in Rolling Stone magazine is actually Jonathan.
Yeah, well, it's true, but, but for not the reason you think. But anyway, I mean, I like
You
the
have a
idea.
reading. Why don't you read it?
So I actually when I read your story, this really jumped out to me. Just because it's that kind of thing you don't get anymore in these today. So this is from Kashufa by James and Gregory. Here on the broken stone was a magic they called writing. Like the painting on our sacred caves, this writing told old stories and kept old truths. Here, you see the marks? He held up a stone shard. It was a story of the fall of the Yellow King at Carcosa, struck down with weapons made of sky metal and put to sleep again. When the Yellow Cult appeared and killed the 10 Welders, they had this place destroyed to hide the story. But the Vinny woman had kept the story too and told me the rest. She told me of the old gods' slumber and what would happen when they woke. So I love that idea, you know, like, and I'm curious, like, you obviously are intentionally doing that kind of inclusion. And I'm curious to know just like, why do you like that idea? Like, what's it kind of attractive to you about, why did you bring in Carcosa as opposed to something else?
Two things here. The best part about that, which is the idea that writing is a magic, that was James' idea. We were sitting around in my living room and we were talking about this Stone Age, these people who have rejected sort of modern technology of the epoch and gone back to Stone Age technology. But of those technologies, they would see writing as a kind of magic. They're story keepers. They don't keep a written record, but they have an oral record. So anything written down would seem like a kind of magic. And that was James's idea. And then why I included it in this place at this time was I was making kind of a nod to the reader. That if you've heard of Carcosa, it's because writing is a kind of magic. It's a way that our minds can go to the same place together. And so rather than make up the name of a city, I wanted to intentionally include one that if you were a reader of the pulps, you may have heard of. So that was give credit where
And it's a nice call out to those pulps, you know, like, and to the ethos, I think, of like a project like this.
You're up next.
I'm up next. I'm going to read from Khyber, which is by Gregory and James. And I'll tell you why I chose this passage when I get to it. But it had been a time of calamity and sadness. One of the Vani had gone blood mad. He had killed the Spear King and sold the man's 7 children to a southern slaver for moon water and a sword made of sky metal. He had the sickness of Cha, the greed for things. His spirit had been poisoned by it. The Vinny woman had seen it before in the time of her mother. She knew what they had to do. And that stuck with me the first time I read the story. When we first kind of started talking about doing this project and we shared our stories with each other, it made me feel the way I felt the first time I watched Conan the Barbarian. And Mako, you know, told you the story of Conan. And it also struck me like hearing Conan's father tell him of the Riddle of Steel. And it just had that like immediate Conan flavor that.
Isn't it intentionally modeled on that Conan opening?
Yeah, well, why don't you speak to this a little bit, what we've got going on? How much of Conan is in our story and how much isn't on purpose?
Well, for me, for my contribution to it, it's very much because when we came to this project, I've only actually been introduced to H.P. Lovecraft. This is not someone whose work I had really been involved with, but Robert E. Howard, however, I was very familiar with his work and loved that. So that always influences me for the action and the you know, the horrors beyond is very much what you bring to it, and it's true, and I think very action wise and very much try to bring a sense of you know, the sword and sandals to it in that way, and the combination between the two of us comes into sort of the poetics that you bring from that almost Conan's chronicler kind of language.
So 2 things. I want you to come with me now on a journey back to my living room. James standing on my coffee table, crouching, imagining, but pretending to draw a stone arrow and draw the bow at a certain length and describing to me how wide the bow length would have to be versus the tautness of the string versus the range, and him mimicking out, right, how the shot would be, and then him looking at me, write it that way. So he was my Conan in that scene, so you know. But to speak to you specifically, we wanted to introduce the idea that the people in the story knew what they were talking about, even if you didn't. And we would name drop the same way that people today, you might name a political figure, you might name a well-known place, and everyone takes for granted that you know what you're talking about.
Which is the section I was going to read. I'm going to read my Chadwick's section there because it's like 2 lines. But like this is exactly like what I liked about this other alternative section I was thinking of reading. So this is from Chadwick's story read. Superstition held the only way to change one's pronounced future was to kill the seer whose lips had spoken. As such, the seers were adamant that no weapons be allowed in their quarter, and so naturally, no one approached the diviners unarmed. So what's so great about that is it's 2 quick sentences. It gives you a backstory lore. It gives you the particular expression of how that lore has influenced this part of the world. And then it gives you a plot piece of information as to what the problem is right now for this person as a result of that chain. It even has the language of like, this happened, and so this, you know, people believe this, and therefore this is the case, and now this is her problem. it's so clean and condensed, and it's like do, and it chains out in that clear way. What drives me nuts is that people write the opposite of that, right? They'll give you like this crazy like 2-page backstory of like the shit that doesn't matter to the plot. And it drives me crazy, like in fantasy stories, when I read like this backstory lore, and like they're so in love with the backstory lore, and it's like, that's not the story. Like by definition, the backstory is not the story. And so like, I really liked how you guys were approaching that particular aspect, you know?
Well, it's part of fantasy that's done well, is when it's not kind of trying to reach all the way around and stick its head up its own ass. Basically, it's like not to give you everything as if it's all figured out. Because like a fantasy world would make even less sense than our world today, which is like, doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't have magic in it. Imagine a world that did.
It's very frustrating to me that fiction has to make sense,
Yeah.
more so than the real world does.
Yeah, absolutely crazy.
Me and my friends used to make fun of one of our other friends because he would always have.
You don't say.
He had this manner of telling stories where he'd provide all this unnecessary backstory, and we would make fun of him. We'd be like, I heard about this thing that happened in World War II. Now, World War II was.
Well, I'll also mention that what's great about this kind of writing is that since we're writing in a shared world, if you read a passage that the author has not expanded on, and you want to now use it in your story, you can, right? And so one of the things that James and I are doing on our new Once Lands stories is we're going through the shared world book as written and pulling all the great ideas from these two guys to figure out which ones we want to use and which parts we want to use. And then when I had a plot element, I emailed Chadwick and said, I need somebody to have come from far away in the north, to have a grudge and to be an outcast. What kind of person would that be? And so he gets to cast the character who has come wandering. I get to put them in the scene, but he gets to send them to the casting. It was pretty wild and pretty fun. So let me ask you this as we wend our way to the end of our evening. Oh, it's so sad. What do you see is a way that others can participate in the shared world?
The most direct way to participate in the shared world is, check out the shared world books, and then go to sharedworld.ca, where you can find like the email address, email your stories set in the shared world to.
Now, what if they haven't read the books and they just have a really cool fantasy story? That's allowed.
Well, to a degree.
I'm on the council, you'll be okay.
You're not gonna have certain things like
what is
no robots.
There's no robot.
But
yet.
It could work out, I guess, somehow. We'll find out, I suppose. Maybe there's a robot land beyond that map.
I think this is an important time to let you guys know that Jonathan, as he mentioned, came late to the party, kind of like a crow coming into the feast, a little late. And his first thought was, hey, in my story, you've made this whole world. I really like this world. Can the world be ended by my story?
The initial premise is like, she's on a quest to destroy this world.
And I'll just mention, we haven't had enough time, I don't think you and I, James, to talk about how our stories work together. So I'll preface it by saying details and plot, we kind of work on together, but the best details and plot elements and sort of fight choreography comes from James. And then I try to kind of smooth it with a certain voice because I like to talk like an ancient poet. Am I mischaracterizing that?
Not at all, actually. I would say the stories are very much written in your voice. And that is for good reason.
Because I'm a megalomaniac.
Because I have a tendency to get into the trap. I'm the least experienced amongst all of us here as far as writing is concerned, and I'm learning so much all times. But really, I get caught up in a lot of what Jonathan was just talking about, is that idea of I love the backstory, and I roll through all that. You really cut through a lot of that and pull the most important aspects of what I'm trying to say out, make it concise and poetic, and then.
Well, I mean, you need to know all the backstory to make things make sense, but the reader doesn't.
Yeah,
They need to know what they need to know for the story.
I once heard Michael Crichton in an interview talk about it, where he was talking about science fiction, and because he is like this hard science fiction in many cases, he was saying like you learn all this science, He goes, and writers want to put it in the story. Because the readers don't need all the science. They only need to know what matters to the plot.
Well, I will say this about James and our collaboration. He asks a really important question often in the drafting process, which is, why? I'll have characters who are thinking all these big thoughts and trying to get onto these big themes, and he'll simply say, well, like, why? Why do they have to sell it? Aren't they on their way here? Isn't this what should be on their mind? And it's so, you don't give yourself enough credit as a collaborator to recognize when I've got my head all the way up and say, you know what, maybe instead we should do this in the story.
Yeah, but I don't like to get too specific about it either, because I like how episodic these are. Like sometimes we finish these 2 stories and even at the end it's kind of like, oh, what have we done?
Oh yeah.
You know, and we're constantly, we're creating these situations where the characters understand the world and they know what's going on, but we are still figuring that out for the next story as well. It's constantly expanding and changing. And with the addition of 2 other authors into the mix, it's this brilliant sense of evolution at all points.
I love when somebody comes into one of my stories and says, I think you should do this. And I'm like, I'm absolutely not going to do that. But in them suggesting a thing that I hadn't thought of, it prompts me to think of other things I haven't thought of and to solve those problems in a way that is me and will work for the story.
Oh, that's so good. For those of you who are interested in picking up a copy of Shared World, obviously all of us will sign it. We'll do some little doodles in it. But spoiler alert, if you're wondering, if you're reading our James and my story carefully, the only person who knows the actual truth is Ginther. So if you catch one of them in a lie, now you know who's telling the truth. I would like to take this moment to make a special thank you to Samantha Biko, who was my original substantive editor on these stories. She helped really craft the Once Lands into a really cogent work of fiction. She had me take out all the real crime that we had committed. We edited those out. So thanks, Sam, for that advice. And to Sylvia, who reminded me that horror stories weren't, in fact, all that scary. They were a place to hide from the horror of the regular world. And so she wrote our introduction, and we have Sam doing our outro. And these 2 amazing ladies helped craft this entire project just by their presence and the trust that they put in us. So I just wanted to say thanks to them.
And also special thanks to Ren and Lyndon, who did a lot of work on this uncredited, well, it's credited in the book, but we wouldn't maybe, you know.
But we never said thanks.
But unless you're reading like the, you know, fine print, you might not know how much work they did.
But that's what the money's for, Lyndon. You don't have to say thanks. My dear listeners, thank you so much for attending. The rules that I believe are about to be reiterated to you are that they're going to sweep us up over there to do some signings. But when they do that, please, please, please come over here. These belong to you. There's a number of them. There should be enough for all of you if you fight over them. Actually, that would make the news so cool. We also have a number of Shared World maps. They're 2-sided. There's an English side and a Eldritch side, so you can help yourself to those as well. Even as budgets tighten, if buying a whole bunch of books isn't in your budget, those are for you. Those are a tangible thank you for coming out to support us on this blustery evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, gentlemen. As somebody who spent a lot of time in the Hyborian age as a child, it was a real treat to sit and listen to that. I would also encourage you to buy both books, if only because you'll notice the tentacles on the spine match up perfectly. So it would definitely add to any shelf. I also would quote Sam Biko, who says, and I quote, "Woo, you guys are great, changed nothing." So there's the feedback from the audience. So thank you all so much. As Gregory did mention, we're going to transport them all over to the signing table just beside the cash desk. Please do avail yourself of one of these prints on your way over there. There are also special prints for those of you who purchase books that will be available at the table as well. So again, something to look forward to. Please do feel free to get the books signed before you pay for them. Please do pay for the books. There are copies both at our central cash desk and at the signing table itself. But huge thanks to Jonathan Ball's own Stranger Fiction, the publishing house behind these books. And please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the stars of our final event of 2023 here in the store, Jonathan Ball, James Gillespie, Chadwick Ginther, and GMB.